Hey everybody, Nick Espinoza, your chief security fanatic here. And today we have to talk about facial recognition because stadiums are becoming privacy problems here in the United States. Now, I think this is an important one to talk about because the continued adoption of facial recognition really is a privacy nightmare for Americans and any other country and any other people that have this system too. And so Carol Haskins of Wired had a really good write-up on this. And unfortunately, we have to talk about Major League Baseball, America's pastime, because they are now following an unfortunate pattern in the United States with their most recent program. As I mentioned, using facial recognition on their fans. Now, facial recognition companies and their customers obviously argue that these systems save time and therefore money, shortening lines in stadium entrances. Recently, as a brief just overview was looked at Citi Field, where people were using facial recognition in lines versus the regular lines. And honestly, the regular lines weren't that much slower. So here we go. Now, here's the thing. Skeptics obviously argue that the surveillance tools are never totally secure. I would be in that boat. I agree with that. Therefore, it makes it easier for police to get information about fans and fuel mission creep, where surveillance technology becomes more common or even required. I've talked about this in absolutely everything, not to mention attached now social scores on restaurants, all that kind of stuff coming out of Australia that we've now seen here in the United States. This is a huge thing, but let's stick with MLB because baseball is a big one. Now, their facial recognition program, dubbed Go Ahead Entry, essentially started letting fans participate on a separate security line, which is usually shorter, like I mentioned that as well. So in other words, you essentially download the MLB Ballpark app, you submit a selfie, and then your face is in their system. And so when you go to the park, it's matched basically at an in-person camera kiosk at the stadium's entrance. So 6 major league teams right now are essentially participating in the go-ahead entry. That includes the Philadelphia Phillies, the Cincinnati Reds, the Houston Astros, Kansas City Royals, San Francisco Giants, and the Washington Nationals. Other MLB teams, including the New York Mets, have their own facial recognition programs for express entry and have had them for some time. So the Mets, for example, have been using a facial recognition system called Wicket for its Mets Entry Express program since 2021. The Cleveland Guardians, formerly Indians, similarly have been using that technology from company Clear at its ballpark in Progressive. You may know Clear essentially as that facial recognition system that lets you cut the line at the airport for either TSA or the standard line if you don't have TSA pre-check. Now, the National Football League, or NFL, has also started using Wicket facial recognition as on top of this. So NFL spokesperson Brian McCarthy said in a post on X, formerly Twitter, that the league-wide program, although not all teams have adopted this right now, at least currently is only available to, quote, team/game day personnel, vendors, and media, but not fans. Now, the Cleveland Browns and Tennessee Titans, the NFL teams, however, do have facial recognition entry systems that fans can use. So if you're a hardcore Browns or Titans fan, odds are you might have seen this at the stadiums. Now, the protesters at Citi Field essentially were representing 11 separate organizations, and this is what kicked off this Wired article, that basically consigned an open letter arguing against the use of facial recognition in these stadiums. And so we're talking about organizations that I'm big fans of, like Fight for the Future, Electronic Privacy Information Center, Amnesty International, and more. The letter argues that, quote, not only does facial recognition pose unprecedented threats to people's privacy and safety, it's also completely unnecessary, end quote. I would completely agree with that as well, because again, if you're in a biometrics database willingly, there's nothing stopping law enforcement from getting that kind of information. It's the same issue I've got with DNA privacy testing and all that kind of stuff. They're literally catching killers, which nobody's going to disagree with, but that also gives them the ability to start looking up our DNA if, let's say they get a court order, or maybe not. And that's one of the big things. Now, Albert Fox Can, he's an executive director of a New York-based advocacy group, I'm a fan of them, the Surveillance Technology Oversight Project, or STOP, and they also signed this letter as well for this protest this past Wednesday. Now, talking to Wired, essentially where I'm getting this from, he said the primary concern with systems like Go Ahead Entry is the potential to be used by law enforcement largely out of the public eye. Quote, the sad truth is that all of these private sector facial recognition systems are just one phone call or court order away from being turned into a policing tool. Now, he's absolutely correct. And he also added that there are ways to speed up lines that don't involve facial recognition, such as tickets that have RFID or Bluetooth tagging for basically tap entry, come and go, here it is. So you're validated in a different way. And that's absolutely right. We have gone centuries without having to have our biometrics, basically, stuck in within these systems in private organizations that law enforcement potentially gets access to through court order or simply is just given to them. Look at Amazon Ring. I've talked about that extensively on that they're building the largest surveillance network and law enforcement's essentially invited in, sometimes without getting warrants. So this is a huge problem, and it's going to continue to get worse. And this is under the guise of, well, this is going to help us, this is going to be more efficient, et cetera, when quite frankly, we're pretty efficient before, and I don't mind waiting a little bit longer if it means I get to be more private, and I would hope everybody would agree with me. Sadly, many don't, or many just don't really understand the pitfalls and ramifications of this. So I think it's an important one. Let's have that discussion once again, because it's coming to Major League Baseball, and I've talked about it in many other sectors, many other verticals, but there are millions of people that go to ballparks every year for baseball, football, whatever, and I think this is a huge one. So let's have the conversation, and I think like I said, I think it's one that we need to quash completely. And please like, share, follow me here on Facebook and Twitter at NickAESP, and please feel free to subscribe to me at YouTube as well. And as always, stay safe, stay online, and please, just please, please, please attempt to stay private. Thanks, everybody.